Okay. So, when is a painting done?
You wanna guys? Hang on. Jesus. Fuck. I feel like I need like a warm-up question to get it's like just drop me onto
Just
that.
have a swig and...
She said to me, she's like, well, Swain, you need to almost like paint your insecurities, your fears, all these things that you try and maybe shy away from or cover up. It's like, let them out. I still don't know how to do that, but it's there. It's like the things that you consider maybe negative about yourself or perhaps your strengths, you know, like if I'm supposedly like I'm indecisive, you know, I struggle with decision making, so I'm gonna use my canvas as a decision making tool, which is what I did now in the show. And it was so liberating to say, like, I don't know, actually. At the end of last year, what has started to excite me about painting is not knowing. When you're trying to control it and when you're trying to make these things that are logical or make sense, that's when it's not working. And ironically, like, it's almost like when you let go and when you stop thinking so much about what you're making and you give over to painting, that's when something starts to happen.
Wait, someone wanted to buy your whole exhibition instead of a Salvador Dali picture.
Andy Warhol.
Andy Warhol.
Yeah, that actually happened.
Welcome to the Art Investor. Like someone who looks to invest in the next Microsoft, Uber, or Airbnb, what we're going to try to do here is to highlight potential investable artists before they're out of reach. That being said, what we're trying to accomplish here is not to give tips and tricks on how to make a profit trading art, or talk at length about the health of the art market, but rather to connect an audience of fans and potential buyers with emerging artists in an intimate, meaningful way. Like buying shares in a company early on, buying art is like buying a small piece of that artist's future success and providing them working capital to make more. The format for these podcasts is to have a rambling, informal discussion about the artist's history and early influences, their education and early inspiration, and their process. And then in the second section is to have the artist talk us through, in whatever level of detail they're comfortable with, 5 to 10 of their works. Going off on tangents is really fun too. What's special about this section is that we've set up an Instagram page solely for these pictures so that you can follow along in chronological order from the comfort of your couch and at your own pace. If you don't know how to operate the Instagram, never fear. You can also watch the screencast on YouTube that I, in true masochistic style, put together and upload for each episode. Once we're done with the numbered pieces, each episode ends with a series of what I call rapid-fire, no-think, yes or no questions. And with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's get into it. Okay. So, what's your sort of take on like COVID? Like, how did your how's business like since COVID happened? Like,
How's business?
Yeah, like are people like redecorating more and are they sort of buying more art because of that? Do you think?
I would like to think so. I mean, I think I've had one of my best years yet in the middle of a pandemic, which is, I think, a bit ironic.
Everyone said that. Everyone I've talked to.
I know a lot of people have not had. Some people have had terrible year. But from the arts point of view, I haven't heard a lot of artists. I think it's been a very incredible time for introspection, but also time to, I think I'm gonna go like long route around now, but like business wise, I had a show that year, but for most of the year it was up and down as to whether it was going to happen because we didn't know. Can the gallery be open? 1 minute it's like level 4 or 3 maybe, and then it's level 5 again. So
when it first hit, you must have been like,
yeah, everything just went.
You were like, oh my word, what's going to happen? Oh my word.
So I kind of like, I entered 2020 with like super little money, and I was like quite stressed, and I was like, shit, I have to make a show like for September. I can't afford to buy materials, I can't like get anything really. So by the time like lockdown hit, which I guess was end of March, I sort of had a plan to sort of use that, what we then thought was a month-long hibernation period, to like just make work and then come out of that and sell all that work, and then use that to sort of buy the necessary like kind of materials that I maybe needed to complete the show. But then it all sort of it all changed. Thankfully the show went through, and I think that sort of limitation, I guess, which I'll probably touch on later, really opened up an avenue for making completely different paintings that I've never made before.
Wow. Okay.
And I actually didn't really end up buying that many sort of materials, which was actually really liberating. And I still have all those paintings. I sold like a few of them. But I think from that point of view, I think that one of the most reassuring things to come out of it was losing the studio for, I guess, I didn't have a studio for about 2.5 months. So I subletted my studio to a friend of mine. And he kind of lived and worked there for that period, so it didn't go to waste. And then, came home and started making work in my flat, and I had a small kind of space in the flat to make work, maybe 2 by 1.5 meters. Like, wow. Literally you could fit a desk and a trestle table, like literally like perpendicular to one another.
Yo.
And ended up producing about 40 odd paintings in that space. Just like little still life paintings whilst sitting at a desk, like observational works. And I think that, because I guess you wonder, like, if you lose your studio, are you still an artist? It's a weird thing. It's like, yeah. The studio, I've spent the whole time making work, or like my whole sort of art career, I guess, investing in that studio. It's been the priority. And then to lose it, and then still be like, you need to make a show, but you're like, well, how do I make the work that I make in my studio in a 2 by 1 meter room? I can't. Where I was fortunate enough then to have like a really big studio, and the space allowed me to like move around and be like quite energetic, work on relatively large works and throw paint around. Kind of go like kind of crazy a bit. It was a very liberating space, and then you get confined to a tiny space with one window, and it's like I think that was, I was like, I'm still an artist. I don't need the studio to validate my sort of life choice.
It's like a smaller palette of colors.
Yeah, it's like I have this need or this urge in me, and I know because there were other friends who, like, some people didn't work at all, and that's totally, that's fine. I think it was whatever was your prerogative. I think at the end or in the middle of COVID, there were a lot of like memes or like people like internet banter going around being like, you don't have to feel bad if you didn't work during this period, or like, because there were a lot of like art competitions and stuff and like promoting, and I think a lot of people were like baking or knitting or took on other hobbies. And I remember like at the end of the like lockdown period, and people were like, well, if you didn't come out as a baker or like have some like phenomenal career changing insight, it's okay. And it's like, okay, fair enough.
I would have said,
I was like, must I feel guilty because I worked through COVID?
Yeah,
like,
I would have felt the other way around, guilty if I just baked.
Yeah, I was like, I didn't work like as hard as I would. I was just sort of at liberty. I was like, I can read my book for 3 hours today. That's pretty cool, or like binge watch some series, but I can only speak really from my experience or perspective.
If you're an information worker, your life doesn't fall apart because you work remotely anyway. Mostly, people just shifted on. So it's to be a waiter. I had a friend who was a musician and a waiter, and as soon as COVID happened, no one was going to gigs. No one was going to restaurants. So he was musicians. He was like, we have to move in with his parents. Like that's just how it had to happen.
Yeah. I've heard like.
Oh yeah, it's very like awesome to be able to, but I wanted to ask, like, you had a best year selling online as well.
I don't really sell anything online. That's not really a market for me. I think even through Instagram, the amount of sales generated through that, I think maybe 1 or 2 over. How long have I had Instagram? Maybe 2015.
Yeah, totally.
And I think it also changes, because I'm with a gallery, and I think the gallery handles most of that. So it's a very different selling method. So selling privately is not really sort of a thing for me.
But sort of just like with the economy, everyone's now used to doing meetings over Zoom. People are more used to buying art without actually seeing it in person. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of accelerated that trend, which is kind of cool. But I mean, you know, that also brings up the split between. So for everyone,
Well,
there's a split
Okay, yeah, sorry.
between you buying art for how much, like what's your split? Is it 50-50 between like an investment and a beautiful thing in your house kind of thing? And so if people are buying more for investment, then that they're happy to buy without seeing it. You know what I mean?
I find that what I was going to say is
Yeah.
because I always thought people would come to a gallery and you would want to buy a work before you see it. And what I've realized now is that, like you say, most of the work before an exhibition will sell a few days before through PDF catalogs or overseas clients who actually can't get to the show. And then maybe over the course of the month you'll have walk-ins or some people who come through. And I found this the most bizarre thing. I was like, but do you not want it? Because to look at a painting on a screen and to experience it in real life are two very different things. And you also, some paintings photograph really well and you see them in person, they're terrible.
The perfect example is Chris Dinovan's stuff, because it's like plexiglass and it's like 3D.
Yeah.
If you see a picture of it, if you see an average picture of it, you're like, you see a great picture of it, you're like, wow, okay. But if you see it in person, it like pops out at you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a perfect example. Like, it's so different.
No, it's like the tactility and exactly what you're saying, the depth and the you know, the colors and all of that. You can get it, I guess, through an image, and you can have zoomed in crops. But it has, maybe it's a very romantic way of thinking, but it comes back to that thing of what is your motive for buying the work.
So I think there's a bigger, broader middle class now that's buying art for not only just to look good, but also as an investment or, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know. I mean, I wouldn't know, but like, what are the motivations? I think it's probably a combination of, I would say the motivation is probably more investment.
With certain artists or with certain
I think generally,
people?
like, firstly, if you're going to buy art, you've got to have excess capital. And that's a luxury in and of itself. Not many people can, regardless of whether you're buying a 500 Rand piece of work or a 150,000 piece of work or even higher, you know. You, in your personal capacity, need to have some level of money to sort of just kind of set aside or burn, you know, in a way. Because what you're buying is not like a necessary tool. You're buying a complete luxury item that I think it adds to your space and you have a connection with it, ideally.
But for me, I mean, at the bare minimum, you want it to like cover inflation. You know what I mean? Like, you want to stash that money away. If you're buying a big ticket thing for yourself, you know, you want it to like be able to sell it again. You know what I mean? If you're sort of
if it comes to it.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, you buy it and you just put it away, and it's like
becomes a family heirloom.
When and when you tally up your net worth, you just add it to. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I want to do. But it's like, I mean, you might as well not burn your money, as you said. You know, you might as well buy an artist that's going to, you can at least you know, mark it up every year, that kind of thing. So a friend of mine bought a car, like a lot of his net worth is like in this car.
Okay.
And I was saying to them, like,
just depreciate.
Like us, it's just a depreciating asset. Like, why did you, like, if you're going to buy a car worth, you know,
350,000 or whatever,
more than that, like, you might as well, like, and they were saying, oh, they really love this artist, and it's like 60K for like 3 pieces or something like that, you know. And this artist was an up and coming artist, you know. And I was like, yeah, you're definitely not going to lose your money on this artist. And I said to them, like, if you're willing to spend 600K on a car, like, you can spend 60, and the car's going to burn cash. You know, you're going to lose 300K on it. You know, you're going to lose 200K. You're going to lose like 50K, like, as soon as you buy it, kind of thing. You know, because it has now a second owner or a first owner or whatever. You can at least spend 60K on making your flat look amazing, and you might not even lose that money. You know, you might actually make money on that. And they couldn't like get their head around. They didn't end up buying. Because I couldn't get the head around that, but they're happy to buy the car and face the depreciation on the car, but, you know.
Well, I think this is also an interesting, I guess, like a psychological thing, because you could argue that, like, for me, buying a fancy car is not It's not like a necessity. My car works. It's kind of old, but it gets from A to B, you know.
My car's really old and it's really great. I love it. It gets better every year.
And it doesn't depreciate either because it's so old.
I've made money on my car. It's
Exactly.
a perfect example. It's kept up with inflation.
Yeah. So, but the thing that, like, I mean, it feels weird to say that, but it is a classic thing of, if you have a fancy car, it also is a status thing as well. You know, that's like freaking psychology, business 101, whatever, like advertising. So even though, like, maybe financially it doesn't make sense, it still provides comfort, safety. It fulfills a need. I think that's the main thing. Whereas art, it doesn't fill like a very literal practical need. You know, it's hard to validate spending money, I think, on something that hangs on a wall.
For a few people, there's like a sort of visceral, like, you know, if you live in a place that isn't beautiful, then you feel it. You know, a few people are like very visually orientated like that. You know,
Yes.
But I mean, I can get by living in a place that doesn't look beautiful, but some people really, they have to. You know.
But even if it's like filling a wall, some people, even now with this, what's it like, we had the whole like minimalist movement. It was like decluttering your space, you know. So like collecting work is also becomes then a spatial thing, actually. Like, if you're gonna buy like a big whatever painting, it's like, do you want to look at this thing the whole time? Can you live with it in your space? How does it, I realize now, like, having moved into this new kind of studio live workspace, I had initially in my kind of room like a lot of paintings or like random artworks and things that I would hang on my wall, and now I'm like, okay, but I'm working. I don't necessarily want this like Chinese dragon staring me in the eye, you know, while I'm working, or like I have some weird photograph of this like alien looking head, kind of androgynous figure smoking a cigarette, and it's like quite big. I bought it at like a artist open sale many years ago.
Yeah.
But I don't want that looking at me while I'm trying to, because I'm influenced by visually influenced by my surroundings. So you then need a kind of maybe a neutral space to hang work in, you know. And that's also, it's like, can I live with the work? So, but in terms of, you know, motivating sale, there's a real passion there, and it's like one part of it is business, but also it's also like this passion for supporting people who are making work, because that's ultimately actually what you're doing by buying an artist's work. You're
enabling them.
You're
to make
enabling
more.
them, and you're actually believing in them, which can't really. Well, I was gonna say you can't put a price on that, and I was like, yeah, you can, 60,000.
Yeah. But especially at this like emerging artists entry to like, well, just when you start kind of like grip onto like being a real artist, you know what I mean? Like at an emerging artist,
a real artist,
an emerging artist stage like that you actually are enabling that person, because they will take that 60,000 rand and spend it on petrol and stuff like that to live and to make more art. Whereas if you're buying further down the line, you know, who knows? Should we actually do a proper question? You know, should we actually like do a proper interview question, like a boring one?
Let's go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so could take us through like your background and like early influences and things like that. You grew up in Cape Town?
I did.
Yeah, me too. Born and bred.
No, very much. I grew up in. I have to go one level deeper than Cape Town. I have to say I grew up in Pinelands. You know.
Oh wow! I grew up
If
in Hout Bay.
any of my close friends listen to this, and they'll be like, they'll get the lol. You know?
I grew up in Hout Bay first.
Oh, there it is.
Hout Bay is a very special place.
Not Fishhook though.
Hout Bay is very different to Fishhook, okay?
Yeah. No, we know. We used to, you know, numerous house parties. I think we could have a rivalry between Pinelands house parties and Hout Bay house parties, for sure.
Yeah.
Same level of intensity.
Hout Bay is so funny because, we probably don't want to bore people with this. Okay, moving on.
Segue.
Early influences.
Influences broadly or specifically art related or just generally?
In your life, like you had an aunt who got you into painting, like you got your grade 11 experience.
Yeah, so I guess born and bred, grew up in Cape Town. My dad's sister actually taught me art. She's an artist. She lives in the UK now, but back then they also lived in Pinelands, and she used to give little extramural kind of painting classes out of a Wendy house in her back garden then. And I was about, 6-7 years old. I used to go there. can't remember how many times a week, probably once a week. And I had two of my best friends, they were also into the art, so we used to just, draw and paint, and that went on for 2 years. And then I guess continued with art through junior school, and then I did extracurricular art with another lady, Mavis Foal. She used to live near Rondebosch Boys High, and also same thing, like once a week. It was really, I guess it was like my favorite time. It sounds cliche saying that, but it was.
Well, when you were 7, you
well, now I'm like 10 at this point. So it's been a constant thing since I was 6, 7.
You look forward to it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like,
It was always a space you could just disappear, even if it was for that hour. And I never really wanted to end.
I did it as well. I did the same thing. Like, mum sent me to art lessons and things. But yeah, like I was, like, it wasn't such a gripping thing for me, So for you, it was. Yeah, and I think it's a combination of the teacher and the, I guess, what you're working on. Because I remember going to like Frank Joubert, and then we learned, and then the work shifted. The work. I think I was at Frank Joubert for like 2 years, also extracurricular, and then it was completely. It felt more like, I wouldn't say academic, but more thought out. Like the briefs were more considered. And I don't know if I enjoyed it that much. Like it wasn't as freeing, but I learned a lot in that little period because it felt more like a school, which I think, it is a school. And it's worth saying that we're in Woodstock and we're in a sort of shared studio space, and
there's a street party happening maybe 200 meters down the road.
Yeah, literally just down the road.
Sunday.
Yeah, and it's like, it's 4 o'clock on a Sunday.
Quintessential time to party.
Yep.
Yeah. But, and then I think, then high school continued sort of, painting and design was like a subject then, and continued with Frank Joubert, and then up until end of grade 9. And then you could choose, I went to Rondebosch Boys High, so you could choose painting and design as separate subjects. So I was like, stunning, booked in already from 16, dropped, I was like, what is the least amount of,
don't need maths, like.
Maths dropped, like, tried the higher grade maths for 2 weeks. So I was like, going to fight with my teacher who was challenging the algorithm. I was like, okay, I'm going straight to standard grade because it'll open up more time to make paint and
we had
paintings.
A Bulgarian teacher who, you know what factorizing something is?
Yeah.
So she would say, factorizing. Factorizing, so we would laugh. It was like super funny for like 2 weeks.
Classic. Yo. I don't want to like step on like Bulgarian toes here, but yeah.
You're probably gonna take that out. She might have been Russian. I can't remember.
Then it makes me more entertaining, but yeah. Yeah. So then obviously no extracurricular activity then through high school because then it was a subject, and then we had amazing design and art teachers, but our design teacher then, Andrew Putter, and we're still in touch to this day, became like a real kind of mentor. And then Kevin Jenkins was like a really strong art teacher. So I think from that point, I guess it was my like dad's sister, Mavis Foal, and then Andrew Putter and Kevin Jenkins, like kind of shaping me. And then I think, and Priska knew him. She was the like painting teacher later on in matric for me. And yeah, that's when I think in grade 11 I made my first oil painting. And yeah, I remember just obviously completely different medium. That's, acrylic dries very quickly, and the way we were taught to paint acrylics was like you do a wash, which is a very thin layer of paint of the kind of exact kind of image, I guess, or picture you want to create on this canvas. So if you've got blue sky, you paint it in a light thin layer of blue, and it was green hills, so it's green thin. So it was, and then you build that layering up, because if you go too thick you can't correct it, and because it dries too fast, blah blah, and then it becomes like quite plasticky. So the first oil painting I sort of applied that same kind of technique of literally copying the color as it's meant to be in layers. And then I made a mistake, like, I don't know, I put like purple down. I was trying to paint like sea meets sand, and I put like, there's like a the purple blue like water overlapped onto the white area, or the white area of sand. That was supposed to be, it's like, oh shit, how am I gonna cover this?
You did one thing that you couldn't go back from,
Yeah. And well, you could actually. This is what I found. Like, because it's oil, you could wipe it off, which I try to do, but then I painted over it with a white, and I was like, wow, this area is so much more rich than the rest of the just literally built up white areas, white laying area around it. And I think that was like the turning point that I thought, okay, this is something I want to, I don't know at that point that it was something I want to do for my like whole life, but I was totally fascinated by this phenomenon that you can layer color and get different colors. You know, that you can create this rich depth, that things don't have to look because I was also super passionate about, and am like, about photography, and I think my painting necessarily, when I started painting, was really a means to an end of enlarging photographs, because I couldn't take big photos. But I was super inspired by like landscape photographer like David Goldblatt. I remember seeing an exhibition of his at the National Gallery and just being totally bowled over. I think he did this series of photos of these asbestos mines, and this, you know, this one specific image, it's like rolling into the asbestos mine and almost coming out, and a lot of these landscape photos had that feeling of like pulling you in. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to make pictures that pull you in. Awesome. Yeah. And I remember when I finished college, I went out with my little camera and I took a bunch of photographs of False Bay, and then I couldn't blow them up to like 2 by 2 meters and have that kind of camera, but they could blow up to like 15 by 15 centimeters. And I like print them out on nice paper, and then I went to the Cork Bay Mall and I was like, so guys, you want to sell these in like, I put them in like little plastic sleeves, and I thought, you know, you could sell these at the door, you know, just as.
This is when you were 15, you said?
No, this is now when I'm like 21 now at this point. And they were like, no, I'm not going to sell that here. And I was like, okay. Well, I was like, oh, I think they're good, but fine. And then kind of, you know, when I didn't understand, I was like, what is the difference between these pictures and like the other pictures here and blah, blah, blah. So I kind of went home, and this is at a time where I've finished studying and I'm sort of in between trying to figure out like, what am I going to do? I had studied design and advertising. And at Vega and College in Cape Town here, and I think halfway through I realized like, this is not really for me, you know. I'm circling like with this, like advertising was really about like taking a, you know, broad thing of thought, like condensing it to its most simple point, and like
which is exactly
packaging that and putting it out to the masses. And I was like,
you want to do the opposite of that.
I want to do the complete opposite. I would get like lost in my research and spend like 2 weeks going down rabbit holes, and they'd be like, you need to simplify, and it became like a very crushing thing, you know. I think just
exactly,
you feel stupid and you feel intellectually like you're not there, and you can't, you know, you get told that you complicate things too much and you overthink things, and that's sort of, you know, I think maybe that was also what like put me off, because I feel like I'm not well versed in this. But maybe it was just out of intrigue of like learning, really, because I get like very waylaid in the research of briefs, and in hindsight I'm like, we didn't have to go that far down the rabbit hole ever. It was just like a bag of coffee that you had to brand, you know, or like whatever. But some of them were great, and I think after that I was trying to figure out, I was waitering at the time, and I was just like, I don't want to work in like an agency. I don't want to do this 9 to 5 thing. I want to do something for myself. And yeah, maybe it's, and so then painting literally came out of, I went through quite a like rough period post college, and like was diagnosed with depression and blah blah blah, and like kind of came out of like, started coming out of the back end, like tail end of that towards the end of 2010. And my parents have been like super supportive, or like kind of central figures in that, and like supporting me through that process. And I kind of made a painting for them at that time as like a Christmas gift. And that happened, the reference for that happened to be one of those False Bay photographs.
Yeah.
And at the time it sort of coincided that I was working with Andrew Putter and a friend of mine, Paul Ward, on a project at Michaelis called the Sketch Assembly, which was sort of Andrew's personal project of reimagining sort of the history of the Cape. And he had initially done a project on like Dutch Renaissance paintings and the sort of still life flower paintings, but reimagining them with local fynbos and flora. And then he wanted to take that concept further and reimagine sort of portraits are like Renaissance portraits, but replacing the subjects with koi sand and looking at the heritage of what happened if the Dutch had sort of actually kind of, it hadn't been such a complete colonization, but rather an integration of culture, and what could those paintings maybe have been, for example. So we were working on that at that time, and during that time I was interested in the back end, like kind of looking at color and studying color on my own. So, and I worked kind of, I guess, with Paul's he's now a director, but then he was
What pushed you over like the edge to get it back into art? You know what I mean? Like what?
What the motivation was, I wanted to make my own pictures. I wanted to like realize my own ideas. And it was like this constant like, how am I going to do this? And it had always been around like focused on taking photographs. And I think it was just the sort of sum of events at that time of like reaching like a kind of almost desperation, not knowing how or what. And I was like, the photograph thing is not working. Like I'm not, like I don't want to go job shadow photographer. I don't want to work in agency. I don't want to do these things. It doesn't inspire me enough to sit behind a computer and work digitally. So I picked up a brush. That's what I had. And I picked up paints and I made a canvas and I painted that photo at like 1.2 by whatever meters. And I was like, great. And I did another one and then another one. And then I thought, okay, this is something I could maybe do, because I was living and working in my parents' garage then at the time. And then I started looking for a studio, and that sort of became the catalyst. Like later, I think I was doing drawing classes then with another artist, Julia Teal. She was my mentor then, and she was like, you need to get I think she encouraged me to maybe move into a studio. And that's when I then joined a sort of larger grouping of artists, and then from there it just sort of, I don't know, I kept making these seascape paintings, and they seemed to, people liked them, and I sold one or two, and that was like reassurance enough to continue.
So what do you think would have happened if you had just gone straight from school and been like, no, I'm going to be an artist and I'm going to just go for it from
there? I
tried. Because look, that, like, I mean, like as we move forward in time, people are more there's a rainforest of jobs you can do. Like it's more like, back in the 50s you could be,
you had to,
you could be a plumber, electrician, or that kind of thing in that tier. And if you go up one tier, you could be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. It was like five careers. But these days, like everything is open. Like you can work remotely doing random,
you can make up a job that doesn't even exist yet.
I mean, for instance, like curating some obscure thing on Instagram, or something like that. But now, like, so people, so young people are probably more empowered to make that decision, to like
just jump straight in,
to make that thing. So
classic like Billie Eilish or whoever, like massive pop stars, like from 15. Sure.
So what do you think? Like, do you think like you would have been further along, or how would have benefited you if you had just gone from then? Or is art less about technique and like raw technique and skill, and rather like bringing together all these aspects of your life that you've learned about, over a journey?
There's layers here to this question now. So, well, let's tackle the first. I can divide it sort of into, I guess, two questions. One, the former sort of being, how could life have played out if I started painting at like 17, and then the other latter about technique and narrative. I don't know. It's almost maybe impossible to answer the question of like what would have been. I can't know that. I know that when I always wanted to, I don't think from high school already I was like, at that time I wasn't even entertaining the fact of not studying. It just seemed an obvious choice. The only thing that was, I think then within my context, was like some kids were going on a gap year, some people would go to the UK and like work abroad, and I just thought this was for me personally, I didn't see this as like a necessary thing. I thought it was a waste of time, and I thought college or studying was just an extension of school and should be got over with as soon as possible.
That's what I thought as well.
So I just went head on into that. In hindsight, I feel sometimes maybe I was too young for college. There was quite a wide age range of people within our class, and I think even if I did think for a long time, like, should I have maybe studied art, but I think the thing that comes up with studying is that, firstly, it depends what you want to do, but I think at 18 not many people know what they want to do. And even if you did know what you want to do, it potentially changes. Like, I couldn't have said at 18 I was going to be a painter now, like, I had other aspirations, and kind of life changes along, and I think that's the thing. So it's more, if you have the opportunity to study, like, it's almost maybe better to do. I don't think it's a necessity to do it anymore, unless it's like you're set on being maybe an accountant or medical practice, somebody who really requires this designated time period. But if you were going to study like art or design, I mean, even design, but if you're going to study art, coding. Yeah, like, I think it's like you should make that decision for yourself and like invest in that too, because it's actually what the studying provides. And I think with art, like, if you had to study art, what it would provide is a very like safe space to experiment and explore ideas, and if you're not maybe confident enough, but you can argue this in so many ways. You could say like, well, this is a learning space and that was for, but some people can go into a college situation and be like, well, I have these ideas and this is what I want to pursue, and it really works in their favor. And then you come out at the end of your 4-year or 3-year degree and you have an exhibition, and that sets you in good stead for moving forward. But a lot of people also study and be like, shit, no, I don't want to do that anymore. And I don't think that's a negative thing either, and then you start to sort of think, shit, what is it that I want to do? So I know that only about after a year of studying, I was like, I don't know if this is what I want to do. And then my parents were like, look, you can finish and we'll sort of support you and help you finish your degree, or you can drop out and you're kind of on your own. And I was like, well, that's obviously, then I'm going to finish, because if everything goes upside down, at least I've got some sort of a degree or something to show for that. So I guess the degree still carries weight in terms of acknowledging that you're qualified, whatever that means. And people feel maybe they can trust you more, you're more intelligent, or you're more well versed in life. But the thing is, I don't teach you all the stuff you need.
Yeah, the thing is, like,
everything happens after that.
Yeah.
Totally. So and then I think like coming to your point regarding technique and how much of your personal sort of story comes into your work. There's obviously, like we were chatting about earlier, an emphasis now on the individual and your own story. That is the focus. It seems to be the focus now. Whereas, if you look back in art history, there's like these kind of tropes that were more, and I guess but the individual is the trope now. It's not like, for example, Impressionism is about, recontextualizing the landscape and breaking it down into different bits of color and not making it as realistic as it was by its predecessors, and bringing in like more emotion, whereas then you can say Renaissance painting was, I'm like oversimplifying you, but like Renaissance painting is in a sense like looking at perspective and achieving some sort of photorealism before there was before the camera had sort of been developed, and then these things sort of happen and things change because painting can do something else, where it's not required to fill that need anymore. So we've gone through like this abstraction, and now we find ourselves in it feels like we live in a time now, like you're saying, like if you can be anything you want, or at least that's how it feels, or that's what's marketed to you can be any job you want. That's very overwhelming. It feels like there's no more limitations. There's no limitations on the individual. We're looking at everything expanding, from gender conversation to politics to landscape, and what does this mean? And it's an incredibly liberating time, but it's also a very overwhelming time, because boundaries that were in place are now just being broken down.
And also you
questioned.
You can make whatever you want. Anything's art, and everything's been done. So now it becomes more about the individual, like what's your story?
The question is like, where do you turn? What do you look at? And so maybe there's this looking inside, because how do I reference the outside if I don't really know the inside? And maybe this is also like a very comes maybe kind of spiritual, but I think for me, like initially painting was always about technique. Of course, what I was referencing was personal in terms of the landscape around me. You know, where are my interests? What are the things that I'm seeing? What am I looking at? Who are the people that are influencing me? What artists am I looking at? So that kind of became the influence in determining the subject matter. But then even that started to come into question. Like, it felt like your emotion is not enough and how you feel is not enough. And that's like, when I started painting, it was very like from a romantic, like naive kind of point of view of like emotion drives everything, and if I paint this you will feel this way. But that's not true. Like, but I still believe it, but I know it's no longer true because it's subjective. Like, I could show your work and you might not like it, but it might be the most amazing thing in the world for me. So this then raises the question of, what do I paint? And that has been a question that's been like sitting in my head for ages. Like, since I stopped sort of painting seascapes, and I remember like there was another painter, Jake Eichmann at the time. I didn't know him then, and we were sort of exhibiting in the same gallery, and I had my first show, and I made this big seascape, and then people were like, oh, you're copying Jake Eichmann, and how could you like make it? And I was like, who's this guy? And I took it so literally that I thought, shit, I can't paint seascapes anymore. Cape Town is too small for two seascape painters. I'm not going to challenge this guy. He's older than me. He's more like, he's been around longer. I'm just going to find a different subject to paint. And I think like it was tied into, maybe it was also tied into the fact that I felt like I'd got what I wanted to out of that series. But it was definitely also a thing of, how do I position myself within this context as an artist, as a painter? And I thought you did that through your subject matter. Style wasn't really, I didn't really understand style. I feel like I'm gonna still have that sort of insecurity within my work of like, what is my style? So the question was always just like searching then from then. So I started like painting different subject matter and like finding things that resonate, and but the motivations for the painting were very technically driven. Seascapes were not just about painting something beautiful and romantic, but also about exploring color and at the time I was trying to understand the color gray and the fact that you can make gray from opposing colors on the spectrum as opposed to using black and white. So blue, if you wanted to make blue, the painting would start off as green and red, or purple and yellow, or whatever, and then layer over it to create depth. So those were the things I was fascinated. So I was kind of like teaching myself oil painting while...
And proving to yourself that you could do the technical stuff,
Oh, trying. I mean, like, trying to understand it, yeah. And then it became the next body of work then was still technically driven. I was like, well, if I'm painting water... At the time I was painting water, which water is technically transparent. It is transparent. And you could argue that if it comes out of tap, it has no color to it. But if it's sitting in the sea, it becomes blue because of, reflection, whatever. And I said, okay, so in that time I was painting those oil paintings, still based somewhat on that acrylic technique of glazing, thin washes to create depth and this acknowledging this transparency. But then the next body of work, which was swimming pools, I was like, what if you paint a transparent body of water in an opaque manner? So it was a complete opposite. And I was interested in shading and light and tonal valuing and how you can create depth with flat color. But there is no depth, it's just flat colors. But it's just by putting one tone next to another to offer an illusion of depth. But it's just a flat surface. And this is where painting, like, it's that kind of conversation of like, all the painting is initially it comes from this illusion, but then it's just a surface. It's just a 2D flat surface. And I think since then it's questioning that and then bringing the subject. What is the subject matter? It was then the internet came in. Does the subject matter have to be my own? Does it have to be my own photograph? What if I paint a photocopy or something? What if I pull something off the internet? And then looking at different artists working in that way, like Luc Tuymans or Witwer. And there was a whole movement in that, like, I mean, it feels like a short space, but that would have been like 2015, that like classic, like the entry of like, I guess, contemporary kind of painting, these wash type paintings that are referencing subjects outside of the artist itself, like even Gerhard Richter, he's like a classic photograph painting overlap. And then it shifts and it expands, and now we're here at a complete, almost, it's like complete reobliteration again, where I don't know where I am again.
Yeah.
Like, I've resolved a little bit of that thought for myself. I've understood that I don't need to maybe pull all these other references. They don't resonate with me. Like, now I'm sort of, what you said, like, I don't know if this was in the recording we were talking about earlier, like this kind of breakthrough, you know, in this latest body of work does feel like a breakthrough.
Well, I was about to say, like, even what you're describing now sounds like it sounds like the journey, you know, of a young artist, you know, whether it's visual or musical or anything. Like, when a jazz musician starts out, like, you learn how, because jazz is about improvisation, so you're like making the painting as you go along.
Yeah.
But like a lot of it's already made. You've played the line before, like you've played the chord before, you've played that scale before, like you. So
you started to internalize the basics or the building blocks. Yeah.
When a jazz musician starts off, like lots of notes, lots of, like, you learn the scales first, you learn all those technical stuff, and you put lots of notes in, you fill all the space with notes because you're trying to, you know, prove yourself, you're trying to fill everything, and you lots of notes with lots of, like, things that aren't interconnected, and then as you get old, like, as you grow in your journey, you become more proficient at speaking the language of jazz, you can link those thoughts up, you know, and so that it becomes a cohesive thing. And then finally, well, I mean, some would say, like Miles Davis, like, he has to play, like, finally, like, he can play like a few notes and get around the chords perfectly in a few notes. He doesn't need all the colors, all the things, you know what I mean? Like, he can, he gets around the changes.
There's a refinement.
Exactly.
And I think you're working toward, as ironic, actually, what you're talking about earlier about having studied advertising and the need to simplify, and you want to complicate, but then within art as well, the same applies, but maybe just over longer periods. Also a process of simplification. Although now I was going to argue about the notes. I was like, I still want to use a lot of colors. I have such a limited palette.
Yeah, or maybe
I go like one color more, and I'm like, I have a freaking anxiety attack, and I'm like, I don't know how to integrate this pink. How do we you know?
Maybe when you're 70, you'll do lots of less, you know. Maybe you'll go back to like fewer, but hey, you know, it's a journey, you know.
But also, there's a third thing you can add into this, like, you know, it's technique, it's personal narrative, but then there's also confidence. And it's weird that, like, I don't know if I'm a very confident person, and I think as a painter, confidence plays a big role, and it's something I'm starting to only learn a little bit about now in speaking to other artists, and it comes up in conversation of how an artist makes a mark, a painter makes a mark, how they choose to, perhaps, if you're talking about like Miles Davis, like say the young jazz musician will try and fill their composition with so many notes because lo and behold it's one note, you know. Whereas I think I was watching a friend of mine, Lisa Grobler, put me onto this talk by Laurie Anderson the other day, and she was referencing a musician she worked with. I can't remember what his name was, and he made a composition 4 minutes 33 seconds long, and it was just silence.
Oh yeah, no, I know about that.
and he was like, and she was like, well, how long did it take? And he said, well, it's all moments of silence that's added up over time. I was like, it's brilliant. It's the most incredible, like, that is it, actually, to have gone from making, I mean, I'm not saying all musicians must make silence now, but it's like, it's such a smart, like, kind of distilling the essence of your subject, you know. Yes. And I think that's what you're working to try and do. And there's no freaking notebook or lecture book on how to do that, because it's your essence. And I think maybe that's like the internal search goes individually. That's why, like, I also realized from my previous show, my second solo, I gotten so far outside of myself, maybe it had become so much about like questioning painting and so existential that I was like, I need to bring it back in. Like, what are the things close to me? What are the, you know, I had another friend of mine, Elise Voskart, she's also an artist, and she said to me, she was like, well, Swain, You need to almost like paint your insecurities, your fears, all these things that you try and maybe shy away from or cover up. It's like let them out. I still don't know how to do that, but it's there. It's like the things that you consider maybe negative about yourself, or perhaps your strengths, like if I'm supposedly like I'm indecisive, I struggle with decision making, so I'm gonna use my canvas as a decision making tool, which is what I did now in the show. And it was so liberating to say, like, I don't know, actually. Like, if I'm gonna paint this, maybe my painting is gonna start yellow, and my intention is to paint this subject over it in this way, and then I'm like, fuck it, I'm gonna change it, and you start painting it, and then because let's say the painting is 2 by 2.5 meters, now it takes time to cover that fucking yellow mark with whatever you want to cover it. Now it actually looks quite cool if you leave it. And this is now I think at that point at the end of last year, what has started to excite me about painting is not knowing.
You could have called it in between decisions.
Yeah, but spaces is a open-ended trying to.
Okay. So when is a painting done?
It's a question I think I very thoroughly explored in my 2017 exhibition, my second solo, where I did a very extensive body of work, kind of stretching across about 60 paintings, sort of exploring this idea of quite literally when is a painting finished, like when do you stop? And on one hand, you could argue, for me, coming from my own personal sort of trajectory through painting and starting painting realistically and then slowly breaking down into more abstraction, it's been this kind of classic quintessential kind of case in point. Because I think, and I could say now I can say like, well, it's down to deadline. External factors. Because
now that you've built up the confidence enough to know when it's done, and you know what you're doing.
And because there's, so this is what I sort of arrived at, and I think that painting is kind of built up of a series of moments. Every time, when I paint in like bursts. So if I set aside like a 4-hour or an 8-hour period to paint, I will paint for intensely. Maybe it could be 15 minutes, it could be 40 minutes, usually at the most, like straight painting without interruption. And then there's a break, and there's like a point you step back and you observe and you look at your work. And sometimes, I think in the shows from 2017 through to 2018, there was this intense exploration of doing either a painting in a singular sitting. So in 2018, I made one body of work that focused on like painting this pot plant from one angle every single day at different times of the day. And I would paint it, and when I stepped away from that canvas, then the painting was done. It didn't matter if it could go further or not. It was an exploration of the painting could exist as a wash, let's call it that, if we were going to talk about it in very linear kind of literal unfinished terms, versus the painting has been very fully realized and quite literally looks like a plant if we're measuring it on that scale. And sometimes you could argue that if you took it to a full realized place, you could argue that it's overpainted. But it depends on your intention now with what you want to achieve with your painting. And that now, I think, becomes a defining factor of not how much paint is on the canvas, or because you can paint the same painting over and over and over, and it can add layers and have different subtle nuances and have different questions. And it just depends. I think there is a feeling attached to that. It can also be external circumstances that can kind of say like, okay, no, it's done, we're taking it.
Like a time limit or a deadline, yeah.
Yeah, like the show is on X date and you've quite literally run out of time. But like, and I think in that way it's a relief, because when it's open-ended, it can go on for ages. But there are some paintings that you can just be like, for example, I make these like little still life paintings or like studies, and I'm like, that's done. Just because I've got what I wanted to from that work. I could take it further, but it feels like it resembles a moment. And I think in my latest body of work, I kind of flipped that around, and I was like, I want to explore that. I want to layer one moment on top of another moment on top of another moment until you could have one single moment, but it's made up of multiple sittings, if that makes sense. So now, because I think when I did that 2017 show, it wasn't very satisfying from a painting point of view to just put a few marks on a canvas and leave it. Like, it wasn't like I had invested enough energy into that work. Even though that had come over a period of time, the actual work itself, maybe that one work took 15 minutes. But then the other painting could have stretched on for almost a year, you know, while these other little works were happening in between. Neither of them is, okay, some are maybe better than others, but I think, yeah, you can also argue time. Oof, now my brain is going on a trajectory now. But to resolve that thought was more about like coming back into the self and saying like, what feels resolved? But it's hard to like kind of argue that, and what has that sense of depth, because I know in like conversations when I have like studio visits with the gallery, they'll point out certain paintings that I'm like, what? How did you know, and we'll kind of grapple with it, and we'll sort of look, and I say, but I really like this. And then you also trust, because you develop this relationship with your director or your, you know, the person that you're working with at the gallery, and you sort of also trust them. And that happened a lot in this previous show. You know, there were works that were done that I wasn't sure, and then we like pulled them out, we put them in the room, and you change the context of the work, and you're like, wow, okay, I couldn't see that because I'm too close to it. And you can also risk, in that sense, almost painting over something as well, and losing the initial kind of idea.
So for that year-long painting, like things like that, how would you finally feel? Like, is it about, oh, I've shown what I can do as a painter, or is it, oh, this thing is done now? Like it looks like it.
I don't think it ever feels done. That's the honest truth. It never. There's always something. You can always change it. That's also the scary part.
That's like, super scary. Like
you can have a moment where, I remember having a studio visit just before the show opened, and the kind of last painting to go into the show, they were like, great, just put it in, and I was on the edge of just being like, boom, changing it completely, you know. And it's like, because that's what I was saying, like it comes to these moments, like in that moment that painting is complete for what it is, but then if I sit with it long enough, maybe I want to change it, or maybe I'm over it, or maybe I want to do something new. And like another artist, I think it was like Ian Gross, he was sort of talking about like, and I think a few others have mentioned, but like if you can sit with a painting in your studio over time, and the painting still resonates with you, or it still gives you something, then the painting is done.
It doesn't continue bringing you back.
Yeah, it doesn't ask you for something more.
Okay.
And now I'm super curious I've sort of started to implement that now, and it was in that show, like you just leave it. And like, for example, one of the paintings, like in that maybe we'll discuss later, the home painting, like it went through so many layers, you know, because it was like, it's not there, and then one night it's just like one mark at 10 p.m. after beers, and it's like, fuck yes, it's done.
Awesome.
And it's like, I don't know how to explain that other than quite literally, it's a moment, it's a feeling, and then it's leaving it and then sitting with that.
But you had to have built up that confidence to know that it's done, to believe in yourself, to know over time. Yeah. So,
time isn't. I think time is the most crucial thing in painting.
But I mean, like over your career, like as like a young artist won't know when it's done. You know what I mean? But when you've done 50, 100 paintings,
done changes depending on what you're interested in and where you are. If you say to somebody, well, I would like to make a photorealistic copy of X, then done is quite literally once it's photorealistically complete. But if you have to approach a painter who's perhaps making something abstract, or abstracting something that doesn't necessarily reference it perhaps references something real, of like, you know, everything comes from somewhere, but now how do you argue that's done if it's abstract? When you've got nothing to measure it against in terms of a literal reference, then I think it crosses over into feeling and time. And that's why, like, if people say, oh, how long did you spend on the painting? It's irrelevant.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Like, because even if that painting was 15 minutes, perhaps I've been painting for 8 years. So it's 8 years and 15 minutes.
Yeah. What do you think about shared studio space? Do you think that pushes you to be more like homogenized with your fellow artists, or do you think it pushes you into your own direction kind of thing?
I moved out of my shared studio space because I was worried that I was perhaps losing my sense of self and kind of getting too much influence. But actually that wasn't, I was relying too much on other people's opinions to resolve my work. So I moved out of a shared studio because I felt like I needed to develop the confidence to resolve my work on my own and make my own decisions. Influence wise, I don't think so. I don't think it's as literal as like said person paints like this, now I'm going to start painting like this. I think that already exists within the the zeitgeist of the time, but like, you know, through Instagram or whatever you're looking at, if you're looking at fellow painters, if you're going to exhibitions, if you're like present in the art scene and looking around the world at different artists,
it's going to happen. Yeah,
it's going to happen regardless. It's going to enter your periphery and you're going to take on those modes of painting or start questioning. No, the jaw is
the jaw is
not
thick.
Even, I don't even know if it's climaxing yet.
Thick with 2 C's.
Yeah. So I think that influence is everywhere, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's kind of cool to, I've always wanted to like say, oh, well, what is the group of this time? Who are the quintessential artists that like represent this movement?
Yeah.
I think it's something really amazing about a movement, you know, because no one exists on their own. It's all community. So yeah, I think it's a very positive thing to be in a shared studio space. It's just
for a time, but then
I think I just couldn't take wearing headphones anymore, to be honest.
But that time, yeah, but that time spent like, you know, with other people was beneficial to a point. And then
100%.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't be here without that. Like, I think you either get that if you study art, then you would get a sense of community through your peers. But if you haven't studied it, then next best thing, maybe get a shared studio. Because you need that community. People keep each other in the know. You teach each other things. You're in line for different art events. This is the biggest thing. Like, you can't do this alone.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
It's already as isolated being just in a studio. So yeah.
Okay, so let's get into the pieces. So this is the segment during which the artist and I discuss 5 to 10 works of theirs, covering whichever aspects and in whatever level of detail they're comfortable with. If you're listening to this as a podcast, i.e. not on YouTube, I strongly recommend that you grab a GNT, get horizontal, and open up Instagram where you can see our numbering of the pieces in the image descriptions and follow along at your own pace. You could search for the_art_investor, or you could click on the link in the description of this episode. I love the sea, by the way. I feel like in a previous life I was a coder, and in a previous life I was someone who
was
I don't know, sort of
worked on the sea.
Yeah, or something like that. Was involved with the sea.
Yeah, there's something very nostalgic. I don't know.
Evocative. Like, it's just so like.
I mean, I know why I sort of started the. I don't actually know. I think it was because Gerhard Richter painted a bunch of seascapes, and I was just totally fucking
hero worshipping, and you were
I was just like blown away by these paintings. I was like, okay, I want to also make these paintings, and I think the photographs maybe we record. So this painting sort of it pulled those photographs that I referred to, the kind of photographs that I took of False Bay, kind of mimic or aim to like sort of reference or mimic Gerhard Richter's early paintings, all those seascape paintings, and then later on, I decided to use those photographs as a reference to make this painting. So this painting, kind of, I sort of cited as my first sort of oil painting outside of kind of school, and the decision to sort of start painting. You know, I
Mm.
hadn't decided yet whether it was going to be a long-term pursuit, but it was more just the starting point. And it was this painting was the catalyst for kind of what came after, and a whole series. I think I made maybe 10 or 12 paintings, seascape paintings in the end through this series, of varying scales. And yeah, I think inspired initially, you know, the aim as a painter, starting painting, was to sort of, I guess, see if I could paint realistically. Can I copy a photograph? So that was.
Do you have the chops? You know.
Yeah, or it felt like, it's kind of like, it was more of something I did for on one end for myself, but also if I wanted to like abstract or go make weird paintings, you know, for example. And weird, I mean like anything outside of realism, I guess, in a naive speaking manner. It was like, well, look, I can paint like this, but I'm choosing to paint like this now.
Yeah, you're practicing.
So it was almost like kind of backing myself, like just putting the safety net down. So yeah, the painting on one end, it represents some form of realism. It represents kind of me looking at color, and you know, at this time I was thoroughly documenting the process of making these paintings. This painting started out like red and green initially, and if you put red and green together, it sort of makes a kind of purpley gray, and a lot of these colors that you see in this final image are the result of red and green in a sense, and then layering and some, I can't remember now how much blue was actually used in this painting, but it's definitely, you know, what you're seeing is definitely kind of amplified by what's underneath. So this was, you know, starting painting in a very traditional manner, layering, working from thin to thick, realizing a painting from its, you know, the canvas is stretched, it's primed, and I say that like it's really, but like my own canvas that I've made, and yeah, it's a very naive early kind of work.
Okay. So that was image one.
Yeah.
Should we go into image two?
Yeah. So that sort of is the start. I do that. Yeah. So this painting now, image two.
What's it called?
It's called In Time Now. There's a comma there.
Oh, I thought it was called something else in the beginning.
No. So the image one was just Seascape. This was the first show. This was the first painting I exhibited publicly. So this happened to about a year and a half later after that first painting, and it's sort of, you can see that it's quite a radical departure from, I guess, let's say, realism or your local or expected colors of what you might anticipate a seascape to be. Some people said, then looking at it, well, maybe it's not a seascape, maybe it's like a range of mountains or a desert, or, you know.
I was going to say, like, what if you were to place a ship in there? What's the scale? Are these massive waves, or are these sort of just ripples?
I think the idea with the painting was, you know, I wanted to change the perspective. I wanted to like kind of try and immerse the viewer into this landscape. So I actually went down to the harbor, like to the yacht club, and I was like, hung around. I was like, can I go on a yacht? Like, anybody? And someone was like, okay, you can come with us on the yacht. And that was wild. I didn't know these people.
Like method acting, method painting.
Well, no. It wasn't in situ at all. I was just taking photos. But I went on the yacht because I needed to get reference. I couldn't find anything online. I wanted to get like close-ups of these waves and create a sort of sense of you're here, and then it recedes into the distance and hopefully comes back overhead. But so no, they're not. You know, I don't know. It's the first time I'm thinking, are they big waves? But it's more just, it's a very motive painting. You know, the color, the initial reference is sort of blue, you know, traditional blue seascape on a very sunny day, but that's obviously not what you're seeing here. And it's pulling references of like these very moody clouds, this very moody turbulent ocean that's moving, and there's a much more of a focus on the light and the relationship of colors and wanting to create depth. And there's sort of a kind of shift of glazing and then thicker areas and washes, and
it just looks like a trip as well. Like the viewer is like you're looking through someone who's having it, like who's hallucinating. You know, it's like You know, it's very, very like it's not just sea. It's like someone is scared of the sea. Someone's scared of, like it's very threatening. You know.
Okay. Yeah, it's ominous. It's like also what is in the background there. What is coming towards you? Perhaps there's like a semblance
really
of grey light. Like there's no escape really. It's just, and I think this painting is quite large. It's 2.1 meters by 1.7 meters. So it's a big painting. And I think my idea, being my first show and all, I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to say like, fuck it, like I'm here, as a painter.
Awesome,
and
yeah.
like I was like, I want the back wall of the gallery. I want to show this work, and I'm gonna, I also didn't want to let anybody down, so I want to make like the best painting I can make. So that's what this kind of was about, and this kind of cemented my relationship. At the time that exhibition happened at Salon 91, and I ended up working with Monique for about two or 3 years after that, which is she's a really amazing gallerist and kickstarted a lot of artist careers in Cape Town. So that was this painting, and then we jump. We jump forward to my first solo exhibition. So this is
Image 3, and it is called?
So this is, Image
3.
Image 3. This painting is titled Inside Out, after Erlich. And Erlich is I had to put that in it because Erlich is the artist who actually, he's a Argentinian artist who actually did this swimming pool installation, and I kind of referenced that in this painting. And I've never wanted to say that, but now I am, because I felt so ashamed that I'd sort of, this is the first painting that I've made that wasn't my own reference, and I didn't know how to feel about that. Like I'd pulled it off, as an internet reference. It was different to what it is here. I've changed it slightly, but it was a snapshot by somebody who had visited this installation, and I wanted to make a painting of a swimming pool from underneath. And I went with a GoPro and I sat in someone's pool and I took photos, but it wasn't really the same. And it was kind of like that feeling when I was small. I always used to swim to the bottom of the pool and sit there. And you just sit for as long as you could hold your breath, and the whole world is quiet, and it's kind of like an escape. And I think this painting in that way sort of represents that space.
Have you tried with a scuba diving kit?
I did not try that.
That's really fun. You should do that.
Noted. So, this painting, Inside Out, perhaps the reference for it sort of, I guess it's also kind of quite literally referencing from working from the inside outwards.
Like you're inside the thing you're painting rather than painting looking at something.
Yeah, and I've also shifted now from, we're 2 years on from Image 2, and we're looking at like contained bodies of water. And I had one of the artists I was sharing a studio with at the time, Chris Slack. We were having a conversation one evening. He's like, well, water represents emotion, and perhaps, moving from this turbulent seascape, this like outward pouring of energy and emotion has now become calmer, more contained. So I thought, wasn't thinking about that at the time, but it was interesting to kind of maybe think about that in hindsight, because a lot had changed over that time. This painting, I think it also, there's aspects of it. The light on the wall of the swimming pool is actually the same, is mimicking the reflection from when the painting would stand in the studio, and the light would pour in literally from the studio window and hit this painting.
Oh, and the other guy's painting?
No, this painting. So I had painted it, and
then in real life?
In real life, the light is actually coming through a real window, hitting this painting, and I thought, okay, and a friend of mine was like, this works, photographed it and added it in to kind of create this sense of, space. Very challenging painting to make, sort of constant push and pull between wanting to get a sense of depth, wanting to knock back that wall, wanting to kind of not paint too much because it's very thinly painted. There's white areas are actually where canvas is coming through, and then you've got this very opaque sort of application of the paint of this like referencing the surface of the water, and obviously quite monochromatic, very simplified, reduced palette. I think like phthalo blues and a few browns and yellows and whatnot. And this kind of, I think it also marks a transition or turning point between shifting the way in which I've chosen to make paintings. I think at this point I also started to change my palette a bit, moving from a palette that I had initially picked up from an old painting book that had primaries but not primaries. I think it was like a 5-color palette, and now I'm shifting to looking at, that'll lead us into the next image, but I'm looking at tonal values within color, as opposed and creating depth through tonal value, light and shade tones, versus glazing, which is the technique of washing one color over another to create depth. So that's sort of slowly what's starting to happen here on a technical aspect in this painting. So that brings us to
image number 4.
Yeah, I love image number 4. It's like one of my favorite paintings that I've ever made. Like, it's painted. It's oil on paper, which is also quite a departure. It's a small painting. It's about 30 by 30 centimeters. The painting is called Jade's Place, Light and Shade. And the title refers to the person's house who I shot it at. This was her pool. This was her parents' house. It's a girl I was friends with at the time. And we was like visiting, and I saw her pool, and I said, this is amazing, I really would love to paint this pool. So she let me photograph it. And the light and shade component refers quite literally to the technical aspect that I was exploring in painting at the time, which is wanting to sort of see if I could paint bodies of water in an opaque manner, but still give a sense of transparency to the water, without glazing. So the whole painting, I treated the subject matter of the painting as an opportunity to sort of relate one tone to another tone, and sort of the pool is kind of a variety of shades of blue that relates to one another to try and create depth. The same with the kind of wicker chairs that are sort of breaking apart in the background, and the little mattress and the umbrella and the kind of vase in the background and the shadows on the back of the wall. It's this whole like sort of trying to break away maybe from realism and starting to like sort of abstract a bit, and breaking things down into their color value rather than their
more experimental
realistic representation.
Yeah, much more experimental, and like taking water like as a clear substance,
and shape, and I think also acknowledging the flatness of the surface. Painting is no longer, it's an illusion, but it's flat. It's a 2D surface. Paint is flat. And I think the choice to work on paper was because I wanted to find the paper is they're prepared with gesso, so it's super smooth, and it had then like a matte finish as well.
Is that the kind of thing that you wouldn't see by just looking at it on digitally? Like,
yeah. I mean,
how big is it?
30 by 30 centimeters.
Oh, so it's small. Yeah.
Quite small. Yeah, you wouldn't be able to tell. I think it was also just because canvas has texture to it, unless you also layer it up and then smooth it down, etc. But painting was a kind of more direct approach to that. And I think I was trying to look, I think, like canvas. It's weird, like there is that thing of like the white canvas expects something from you, and how do you approach the surface in a way that you can surpass that expectation, and this is like an ongoing exploration of surface and the relationship of paint to surface, and I've worked on many different materials since then, but paper is the first step out for me at this point of going, well, painting doesn't have to necessarily be on a canvas. Can I make it work on paper? It maybe makes it closer to drawing. If it's closer to drawing, it allows me a more direct way of making a mark, because it doesn't have to be so layered. I don't have to cover up and get away from that texture. So that's what this is kind of also looking at. And I think, the show, this is these two paintings form part of my first solo exhibition that I had at the AVA gallery in town, which was something I've always wanted to do because it has a long standing of super important artists that's shown there, and I sort of wanted to try and kind of introduce myself into that. I wanted to kind of be a part of that lineage. You know,
and AVA is very good for, you know, like beginner artists to get this stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and it's an amazing space. You know, if you've got a project and you wanna, it's open to that. You know, you got to go through a submission process, etc. So, I think conceptually, there was an article written on it. The work was featured in Art South Africa. The work became a reflection of, I guess, some middle class suburbia. My upbringing, I think, you know, it's very specific in considering my context as a Cape Town, living in, you know, having been raised in Cape Town, there's a specific class of people that has swimming pools, you know. So it also kind of spoke about that and my kind of upbringing, being in Pinelands and all. So. Yeah. Then
image number 5.
Image number 5 was a massive departure.
Okay, yeah, this is very different.
Yeah, it's a radical departure. This painting, after my show in 2014, I had this like massive surge of doubt. Like the show was extremely successful. Started doing quite a few group shows. And I kind of like backtracked. I wasn't sure. I was like, shit, do I still want to, like, I've now achieved what I wanted to with the show at the AVA. Like, that's cool. Thanks. And now it's real, you know. And I was like, fuck, I don't know. Like, I haven't planned for this, you know. This is not part of the plan to be an artist. Like, I had other plans. So I was in quite a state, and I ended up going to Finland to do like a 2.5 month residency there. It's like literally booked out to the top of the world. At the end, like their kind of end of winter into spring, and kind of sat and sort of considered like where to take painting, you know. And this was the first time while I was up there. I had an amazing studio. The residency was very rural. It was about 4 hours north of Helsinki, kind of quite literally in the middle of Finland, in a very pastoral setting, lots of snow and forests basically. And this painting is kind of about that. I was making sort of on plein air paintings from my studio window. I had a view of the kind of landscape. It was the first time sort of starting to look at not painting from photographs and painting from life. And this painting is kind of made not from life and not from a photograph, but in a sense just pure emotion, and it's just from memory, I guess, in a sense.
Is it a forest?
It is a forest, yeah. And it's a very
when I first looked at it without the background, I wouldn't have, you know,
wouldn't have known.
But now I see it. I see it really. There's the snow, dirty snow, and forest.
Yeah, big black forest. So it was kind of taken while I was staying on the residency. It was a big farm. Well, not a big farm. It was like a big open piece of land. You could walk around, and this huge forest behind us, and then like 1 or 2 sort of lights from the neighboring kind of farmhouses. They're not farmhouses. They're just normal people living in the countryside. Sorry.
Farming what?
Yeah,
Snow.
And I had a lot of material. I had this like 3-meter strip of material because for some reason this material there was so cheap. So I bought this kind of canvas and I stretched it out across the whole back wall of the studio. I said, guys, I'm painting here now. 3-meter freaking canvas. And I just took the biggest brush I had and just started making these huge marks up and down this canvas one night. And because I wanted to make this huge landscape of this experience of looking at this forest. And like the photos I had, I didn't have enough time to like sort of make like, I didn't want to make a photorealistic painting, and a residency is for doing something different outside of what you would normally do. And made this painting, finished the residency, rolled it up and hid it away for a year. until I had my first show. I had my second show actually at Everard Reed, Cape Town, and the theme of that show was kind of pastoral abstraction. and there were about, I think, 4 or 5 of us that were selected, and we could make like 4 or 5 works for the show. Had like a demarcated section of the gallery, and I had these like little works that were looking at sort of breaking down photographic references and sort of moving slowly into abstraction. They were forests, but they didn't literally look like forests. It was more focused on color and mark making. And I said, well, I have this painting. I have this painting, you know.
You didn't think that would be the one?
Yeah. They were like, I was like, I had this, like, rolled it out, and they're like, great, we'll take it.
But they were just like, we need to get some.
We needed. So we ended up
Friday.
we knew, like, I don't know. It's just. So I ended up stretching it, putting it on a stretcher. Fucking massive thing, trucking it to the gallery, and there it was, and it sold to an American collector based in where is he? Belgium, I think. Very prominent collector, and we also formed a relationship after that because of this painting, which is great. And yeah, he was like, this is the best painting. I was like, cool. I don't like, it's a totally, I think when you make something like this, and I think the weirdest thing with painting is I find that, like, when you're trying to control it and when you're trying to make these things that are logical or make sense, that's when it's not working. And ironically, like, it's almost like when you let go and when you stop thinking so much about what you're making and you give over to painting, that's when something starts to happen.
Yeah, if you follow the rules, you're done.
Yeah, it's like, it's almost,
follow
because it's happened, and it's almost, maybe it's anticipated, and maybe perhaps this is unexpected. It was an unexpected painting. It most certainly is an unexpected painting for me. So, and maybe that's the best way to kind of summarize it. So, yeah, that was, I think, maybe a very early or like a quintessential turning point for me. I didn't kind of get it then. I can understand it now. But, we're looking at 6 years on.
Okay. You can understand the events surrounding it and how it came to be and how someone loved it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
Very evil, huh?
Very evil.
Very Game of Thrones.
Is it?
No, or the Haunted Forest,
Yeah.
It looks like there's a it looks like dirty snow, dark forest, and then like a big mountain in the background, but you can't see above. You can just see the base of the mount, the very icy mountain.
This is it's also interesting because it's just like a border. It's just like a flat, like it's an impasse. It's like impenetrable mass. There's like cracks and stuff, but you don't want to go in there. So yeah, that's Finland. That was called Finland. I think it was an apt summary of my, not that I had a negative experience, but it was like I thought it summarized Finland quite well. This is
image number 6.
Image 6, yeah. So image number 6 forms part of my first solo exhibition at Everard Reed, Cape Town, but my second solo exhibition overall. The title of the show was called Searching Eudaimonia, and it sort of has to do with we were talking about earlier about when do you decide a painting is finished, and this show was all about kind of exploring that stopping point. It was kind of, and the title is also kind of borrowed from exploring a sense of feeling or a moment, and this point in the process where when you're painting you're almost taken over by something else. And the kind of title is pulled from Elizabeth Gilbert's book Big Magic. And I guess she's talking about the essence or the process of making art and the process of creating and writing, and how when you're writing and in the process there's a moment that happens where you're almost taken over by something else outside of yourself, and she called it like a daemon. In historical terms it was called a daemon, but not in a negative way, like in an evil sense. It's like almost like this genius or something outside of yourself, this external metaphor for something that you can't explain takes over you because you can't, So I was sort of loosely referencing that, but also looking at departing from sort of photographic reference and questioning what painting can be if it's not realistic, if it doesn't refer to a subject quite literally, if you can't really discern what that subject matter is. And this is the beginning of my kind of exploration, or furthering this exploration of painting as a form of mark making. You know, it's not using a brush to color in or fill in areas so that it looks as such, because you can see what it is, but it's more saying a mark can represent a leaf. And the reference of this painting, I mean, the title of this painting is called Studio Reference 28. And in a sense, that sort of refers to the fact that the reference itself is almost just part of the process. You know, it's like, it's a picture that I had in my studio, and it's something that I'm working through, because this show was composed of about 60 paintings, and there was very dynamic, very wide kind of dynamic range of subject matter, from interiors to exteriors to quite almost randomized. And I was feeling at a point I was like, well, what is painting? What do I paint? Is it in the subject matter? Is it the style? And so I started trying to quite literally paint everything, which is, I guess, very ambitious and maybe not the most intelligent thing.
Yeah, okay. How many did you have to do?
Well, I ended up doing 60, yeah.
Yeah, hectic.
Yeah. And they were small, like most of them about like 30 by 38 centimeters.
Is this one small?
No, this is
Yeah, this looks
2 meters by 1.5 meter. But it was a literal grappling with painting, searching across canvases for what is this reason for painting? What is how do I decide when this is complete? There were different stopping moments, and yeah, this painting was made kind of over the duration of working on the show. It took over a year to make this work, and it is this kind of push and pull between wanting to represent something literally but being very intrigued by the subtle nuances that are starting to happen, and trying to develop a confidence to move away from a literal representation, from a photographic reference, and trying to find some sort of trust in the painting.
Yeah, it's almost futile me trying to say what I see in it, because everyone's going to see something different, you know?
Yeah. I think it's also, you realize, like, you can say, like, okay, well, green, I know what this reference is, you know? Like, it's a forest reference from A Holiday to Nature's Valley. And I can say, okay, well, the green quite literally represents foliage.
Undergrowth, yeah.
Yeah, but then there's this very intense red coming through.
Yeah, what's that, you know? Like,
and the red was initially because I was going to paint the whole painting green, and red is the opposite of green, and therefore the green will become more powerful. But if I'd covered up that red, this green wouldn't be as powerful, it'd just fall flat.
Yeah.
And that was what I'd like sort of learned from the other paintings in the show, because there was still another 3 or 4 like this. So it's also learning, like, to leave things and kind of take a chance. And there's this like red squiggle that's happening on the left here that's also kind of mimicking the green foliage, but it's red. So yeah,
I love this at the top right hand corner, that branch with a pink background, you know. Looks like it goes on forever, you know, like, well, not that, I mean that as well, but in the middle, like, it's very cool. It leads you along a path here.
Yes.
You know? And then there's this, it looks like a bat, you know, like some sort of thing there, but you know, and then maybe like a willow tree, or like one of those fig trees that have roots that come down.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, I think it's cool that you can see the sort of depth in it, because that means the tonal value is also then receding, which is great. But I think it's taking a lot of chances on, like, if a dripping mark, is it a root or a leaf or what's hanging down, you know? And like, what is this?
Yeah, what is that?
This is like painting in like an area of the sky, but then it's...
Oh, by the way, we're talking about the top left.
Top left, middle, kind of neutral cream marks.
Yeah, jagged marks.
Yeah. So I think it does represent, like, there's this push and pull, you know, this what to leave, what not to leave. It's what we were talking about earlier as well, this indecision, the insecurity, this confidence, and building confidence and grappling. So yeah, but this started, like, this is a kind of the point of departure now for painting for me from photographic reference strictly, and starting to let go, trying to let go of... Give
yourself permission to...
Yeah, to expand outside of what I know. Okay, so image number 7. This painting is titled Courtyard in Nicaragua. This painting is from my latest show at Everard Reed, which happened in September last year, 2020. And I think this is a good place to, we were speaking about earlier, or you asked me how much of painting, or when you make a painting, is kind of comes from technicality or personal narrative. And I think, having started painting from a very technical space, and the subject matter is informed, I guess, by personal reference, it's now becoming much more personal, and the technicality is sort of trying to almost break those rules and kind of let go, in a sense, and starting to like try and trust painting more. And I think we were touching on that on image number 6, talking about this kind of shift from literal representation towards trusting painting as a mark. And a mark can represent, the subject that it could have in the past been literally trying to represent. So in this case, for example, you've got these blue marks in the center of the painting, which in essence are just blue marks, but they also represent for me the shadow of a sort of palm or some sort of tree or leaf, and this painting is, it's still from a photographic reference, but the reference is starting to, it's more there just as quite literally a reference, like a signifier. And it's a reference that comes from a trip that I did in 2012 to Nicaragua, and it's a courtyard that I saw there at the place that we were staying in, a hostel at the very end of our trip.
That's perfect. It looks exactly like that. I've been to Cuba, and that's it like immediately reminded me of Cuba.
No ways.
Yeah,
that's amazing. That's great. And it, the painting, this also happened, like, this is the body of work that I made during COVID. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It's kind of resources and financially, I was like on the bones of my fucking ass. And there was another painting I'd made. I was making the same painting twice. This painting is quite big. I can't remember the exact size. I think it's like I don't know. It's like 1.5 or 1.6 meters by 1.2 or something. It's a medium-sized work, and I was making a smaller work during COVID of the exact same reference, because in the initial reference it has a blue wall against a blue background, blue sky, and this is what I wanted to bring through initially. And while I'm making that painting, it's not giving the same impact, that I want to make. Like, it's not the same richness of blue. The blue's falling short, and this painting is happening now in the studio, and I've started painting like the background yellow, and I started just drawing on this existing canvas that I have, and I start drawing the kind of marks for this painting that I want to create. And this relationship that happens between this blue and this yellow is like, I can't ignore that. I can't now. I reach a point where I go, okay, well, you can make it literally and you can make it blue if you want to, but how exciting is this? How unexpected is this sort of mark? And so then I chose to start making this painting in relation to these blue marks that I'd sort of initially put down.
Okay.
And it's sort of starting to shift and make paintings in the sense of like trusting what they are and what is coming out, because you made that mark initially, and I would always cover up these marks that were like supposedly sketchy marks, quite literally, not sketchy as in like you couldn't trust them, but like it was the sort of outline or something, and I love the fact that I have to work with this, or that I'm choosing to work with this, and that these colors that I'm putting down in relation to this yellow, and where I'm choosing to put my attention, and like sort of getting lost in these little details, for example, in the pots, of like bringing this little subtle green in and making them, yeah, that's a leaf, but it's also something else. And it's sort of starting to take liberty and saying, I don't have to, I'm sort of still holding on to some sort of representation to anchor you there in some sort of familiarity. But actually what I'm more interested in is the color and the mark.
Yeah.
And the subject matter is literally just a safety net for my exploration.
But also like I mean, me as a total rookie, like I can't, I'm not like I can't do visual arts at all. But for me, like I wouldn't have the confidence to make that whatever this is on the left, this brick or this part of the wall, so undefined, and this plant so defined in the same vicinity. You know what I mean? Like, but you had the confidence to do that. You know?
Yeah, and it's Thank you. I don't know what I was gonna say, but it's like.
But it works, though. You know?
Yeah,
it works.
And I think anything you're talking about stopping, and this is a classic case of. You go any further, the painting changes. 100%. If you change one thing, and then you have to grapple with it more, and then that painting is gone. So this is like pushing for me the edge of that, and if I started bringing in more information, then it's a different painting.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So, yeah, this was sort of, I think, in a way, the centerpiece of the show. Quite literally, as you walk in, it was in the middle of the wall. I love it.
Cool. So this is image
number 8.
Cool.
Okay, and very aptly titled, I guess. It's called Home. So 2020, spent a lot of time at home, and can say it's coming home. I think, as you were saying, Chris, it's like kind of the quintessential essence of everything that we've been speaking about in one painting. I think Chris personally requested this painting.
yeah, I wanted this one in. So it's bringing together, the textures from the water in the beginning, and then the negative and positive spaces from the swimming pool and things. And then it's bring together also the confidence to jump away from realism into abstraction, but also include some realism. You know what I mean?
And the foliage, and I think this is a quintessential, this painting was one of the first ones to start and one of the last ones to finish as well. So I grappled with this work for the duration of the creation of this solo. I don't know, as maybe for the larger part, 8 or 9 months making this painting. And I think, as I said earlier, we were making a joke about time, or when do you decide that this work is finished. The last thing to go into this painting was the light blue, sort of solid opaque, kind of whited out blue in the center left of the painting, those few marks, to kind of demarcate that sort of leaf, and suggest that there's maybe a swimming pool in this painting. And then these kind of blue marks that lead out of the right-hand side of the painting that actually fill in the spaces somewhat between this bench that was next to the pool. And those were the final marks. And I remember doing that. I think I'd come home from going out for dinner or for a drink or for a beer or something. And I don't normally paint and drink at all. I can't, I'm not one of those type of artists that can drink and paint or whatever. And I just sort of picked up a brush and I looked at this painting. I was like, I need to do this, And that was that. I remember it at 10 p.m. at night. Can't remember the day, but just sitting there making that mark super intensely, super focused, and then stepping away and being like, wow, this painting's done now.
So those 2 marks, these
sort of, this kind of, how do you describe it? Light whitish blue opaque mark in the center of the painting that leads out to the right and at the bottom. It's the piece that sort of suggests that there's a swimming pool, if you will.
Or a road.
Yeah.
A road leading out.
And this is the thing, you're saying, is what we're talking about is this: how do you measure the painting if it's removed from its photographic reference or this literal reference, and the meaning that it takes on for the viewer as well, versus the intended kind of view that was created by the painter. Yes, the jewel is going.
Still going. 6:30 Sunday night.
But yeah, it was an amazing.
It's almost as if you can fall through. So that you could step out this door and fall through into open air. Or you could step through that hole. Or there's a thing over there, and also there's a. I'm saying over there, but obviously people listening can't hear.
Yeah.
In the middle and at the bottom right, there's more sky, and then that you could fall through into. This whole thing is in the air, and then above the well, middle of the door or middle of the open space to the left, go a little bit right, and there's a like you can fall through, like it's sort of
fall through the blue.
Yeah, breaking at the seams there. Like it's got like the layers of the painting are breaking through, and it's actually you're in the air. Like, you know, this is like a garden. It's suspended in, you know, with sky hooks and the great glass elevator. You know,
That's
and
amazing.
you can fall through. You know, that's what
Yeah.
it looks like to me.
I'm thinking of now this book that I read recently, recommended by my friend Lisa, called The Starless Sea, and it's like this unending, it's like a freaking 500-page epic about just this boy who discovers this underground library and just goes through all these different worlds, like deeper and deeper into the center of the earth, and it's like the author is just writing about these worlds that are just
Worlds
suspended
within
in
worlds.
space and like time and can't exist on the, you know. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think, you know, I don't know how to, you know, sort of explaining this painting from my point of view of constructing it. It was initially, you know, it is quite literally a reference of my back garden at my parents' house where I grew up and spent a lot of time, and always wanted to kind of paint this view. It's a very awkward snapshot, and I was trying to kind of, I guess, paint it somewhat semi-realistically initially, but, you know, there's always these points where there's like a point of interest and then something that falls flat, and it was just too boring, you know, to say like, well, here's the edge of a stoop, and here's a garden, and here's a swimming pool, and here's a bench, and here's a swing, you know, and those things are kind of embedded in it. Like, I can say, like, on the right hand side, in the deep of the blue here in the top right corner, there is a sort of frame, and that was the swing that I swung on when I was like 5-6 years old, you know, but no one else would know that. And there's and well, now they will, because I've said it, but but like, you know, it's making that, realizing that it's falling short and it's not doing what you want it to do, and quite literally out of frustration, like painting over it, painting it blue to say like, I'm going to start again and again, and then bringing back these elements of foliage and pushing and pulling and seeing through this process of quite literally painting that these little subtle nuances are starting to take place. Like, for example, on the bottom right here where the orange is, which are, you know, the orange once again is painted in as a sort of opposite to the green, but then it also looks to me like it's been spray painted there, and I quite love it, so I'm leaving it, you know, and I don't know how it happened like that, but it has, you know, and it's starting to trust that, like, every choice that you are making on your painting is because you wanted to make that choice, and you don't necessarily have to cover that up anymore, because all of those choices combined create this whole, you know. So
Yeah.
painting, you can like be super cheesy and say, well, painting metaphorically represents a life well lived, but yeah, it is. It's like it's taking on its own life now, this painting.
Yeah. So yeah, you will see more things in it than you intended. You come along and you're like, oh wow, there's that.
And trusting those things to stay. Do they stay there? And the question now, the painting and it makes it harder, because now it's like, well, what do you measure it against? That's now the question I'm wondering. It's like, how do you determine whether it's good or not? Is that a question that's beside the point?
That's very
you know?
difficult.
And like, the same question comes up: how do you know when it's done if you're not measuring it against your initial reference? And then that comes to what we were saying, like when I said to put the blue into it, and it's a feeling, and you're like, it's done. It can't.
Yeah.
Without changing it entirely, it is what it is now. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So should we move on to the medium fire round of 10 questions, and then the rapid fire yes/no questions?
Okay, medium fire.
Okay, so
I assume medium fire is not yes/no. It's more.
medium fire is, you can take as long as you want. You can answer it in a sentence, or you can answer it, you know, you can go down a massive tangent if you want.
Okay, cool. Let's try not to go down too many more massive tangents. Okay,
so
shoot.
is there something you would advise young artists to cultivate early?
Believe in yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As cheesy as it sounds.
Yeah, no, that is my thing. It's like, believe in yourself and have vision.
Yeah, it's
I've
like
been saying it for years. But
for me, it's like, right, like, you know, at 27, I don't the things I cared about when I was 23 are no longer so gutting to me. Like I'm not embarrassed about the same things I was embarrassed about a couple of years ago. So just extrapolating that into the future, when I'm 35, I won't be embarrassed about the same things that I'm embarrassed about now. You might as well just go for it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think, for better or for worse, you believe in yourself. And maybe that's a better way of putting it, because a lot of people who, it seems that people, not actually everybody is so like unrelentingly focused on one specific thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody knows maybe what they want to do from X age.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I think painting has come out of a series of events, but it's always been there.
Mm-hmm.
But also painting and being an artist is not something that's taught and encouraged.
Yeah.
That you should be that, because it's fucking crazy, but it's also not actually that crazy. It just depends on how you want to be an artist.
Yeah.
That is maybe the most important thing. What type of artist do you want to be?
Mm.
And that's what then starts to make it a challenge, because there's so many ways of being an artist now. It's not the age old adage of like, classic Van Gogh trope of like dying and not selling any work or cutting off your ears.
Yeah, anything could happen.
It's like, sure, that exists, and I think it's definitely mentally taxing. But you could say like someone starting a business startup now, someone pursuing their own career as an entrepreneur is also mentally taxing. It's just different.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not comparing art to art, but it's. Yeah, so I think it's you from as a just supposed to back yourself.
Cool.
Yeah.
Who's
and then surround yourself with all the things that encourage you to back yourself.
Yeah. Who's your favorite artist and why?
For at what point in time? It's changed. My favorite artist in the beginning, when I was in high school, was Salvador Dali. Actually, this guy, making those paintings, these surreal. For those of you that don't know, Salvador Dali is a surrealist painter from...
Such a rock star, that guy.
Just
like rock star
performer, showman.
Yeah.
But the paintings, I think... I was just like, how? How did you make this? There's no Photoshop back then. How do you realize these quite literal surreal visions, Think like... person being born out of an egg, like a thing morphing into subject matter morphing across the sky, breaking up, worlds exploding, faces, like chairs that are skeletons and walking. It's just like
and at a time where it was much more shocking than it is now.
And visually, the antithesis actually of what was happening in the world then. People were like, yes, some of those paintings express some form of horror, and that's, I guess, what a lot of Dali's work gets cited as, like the horror of war and that kind of thing. But at the same time, it was also like a visual liberation, and it also gets cited in, by Freud and Jung and, dream theory. And I think that's funny because now I'm thinking in college I was obsessed with dream theory and Freud and Jung, but. Yeah, that was definitely for a large part of my time. Up until a point, actually, in college, where I was trying to make a painting, and it was so referencing him. And my ex-design teacher, Andrew Putter, said to me, he looks at the painting, he goes, "You're setting yourself up to compete with Salvador Dali, and that's not necessarily the best way to make a painting." And I think at that point, I immediately stopped making that painting, and I thought, fair enough, and changed direction. And I think since then, Gerhard Richter was a big favorite for a long time. And then after that, David Hockney has been quite a consistent influence in my work, just because like the way the man deals with space and color, and he's bringing all these different mediums. He's looking at photography, he's looking at painting, he's looking at drawing, and
hits all the spots for you.
Yeah.
Natural creativity or relentlessness? Or determination? Natural creativity or determination?
I want to say relentlessness.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a split? Like a 80-20 split? Or do you think it's 50-50? 80% determination, 20% natural gift?
Look, I want to say you can rely on natural gift, but I think we're also seeing now that, like, if you fucking...
You have to get up in the morning and market yourself as well.
Yeah, if you just work at your craft, I've seen, like, friends around me, like, just hustling at their craft, and it's paying off, and it's like... They are good at what they do, but they're also good at what they do because they continue to do what they do, you know? Someone literally actually read the night before last in this... I'm reading Colorless Tsukuru by Haruki Murakami, and the character speaks about his dad, and he says his dad has gone up to this mountain spa to die, and he's talking to this other character about talent. He's playing the piano, and the one character says to him, he goes, "You're an incredible pianist." He goes, "Thank you, but I don't know if..." He's like, "Why are you here? Why are you dying? Like, why have you come to die?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know what more I can do." And he's like, "I don't know if, you know, talent is enough. Talent is not reliable." And I was like, fuck. And he's like, "You know, as much as this piece may have affected you, there's times where maybe I'll have a toothache or stiff shoulders, and I won't be able to play the piano as well as I could if those things weren't bothering me. And therefore I couldn't hit the climax or achieve the kind of outcome that I wanted to achieve." And I think reading that, knowing also having read Haruki Murakami's book, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, or What I Think About When I Talk About Running, he details his sort of writing methodology, which is he wakes up at I think 4 or 5 a.m. and he writes for 4 or 5 hours straight, and then he gets on with his day, and he does that every single day, you know. And that is the discipline of in that sense, in his sense, writing. And I think I wondered when I read that moment whether it was a reference in a sense to that, kind of like embedded there. And it shook me as well, as someone now who's like moved into new studio space and like living on their own, and kind of put everything into one box and really booking into this. And it scares me profoundly. Like, it always has scared me, kind of being an artist, because it's so... it's not predictable and it's unreliable, and I think that's the reason why perhaps it's not encouraged, because there's no guarantee. But what we've also learned now from COVID and people being retrenched is, fuck, even if you have a normal job in inverted commas, if you're employed, let's put it that way, there's no fucking guarantee your office can just axe you as well, because they want to keep costs down. So then you, like, it comes back to, you might as well fucking just do it. You know, but it doesn't make it easier. So, relentlessness. 80, 60, 40, I don't know. 70, 30.
It's a tough one, eh?
It is a tough one. I think there is, there is definitely also a thing outside of yourself that I think...
Just the way someone looks at the world. Yeah,
making work, and there are definitely people who are like, you know, genius level or super gifted, but they also, it's their choice as to whether they want to work at it, you know.
If you weren't involved in art, what would you be doing?
There's a word astronaut came to mind now, but not a fuck.
Yeah, it's a lot of discipline. It's mostly discipline. It's mostly relentlessness and not much creativity.
I just want to go to the moon. I want to go to space.
What do you think the most telling signs are for the future success of an emerging artist?
Jeez, like fortune teller stuff. What are the most telling signs for?
Well, how about this? Like, I always thought, like, someone who, like,
so bad. I don't know.
If you look at someone's body of work, you can see, like, if they're hit on something, you know, if they've hit on something different, something but unpredictable, something.
I think it's one thing to say, like, you can go to a grad show and look at different artists' work and weigh them up against each other, and you will quite clearly see who are maybe the better artists in that moment. Are those artists going to be artists forever? I don't know. I don't know how you can answer that question. I think telling somebody has something. Everybody kind of actually has something. When I was lecturing, teaching painting for a bit, even the artists who I thought maybe No, I don't know how to say that, but like some artists were stronger than others in the class, but actually the artists in like that was just from my perspective when they meet the criteria, but then certain artists that weren't necessarily strong in the class have gone on to become extremely successful artists now, and certain artists who were at the top of the class have not chosen to pursue that work. So I can't alone say this and that, but I think inwardly determination, outwardly that if they're creating work that doesn't fit the status quo, that's not towing the line per se.
Yeah, if they toe the line too much, it's pretty much certain that they're just going to go along averagely.
Well, maybe not. I mean, I feel like I was towing the line when I also started painting, and I'm making very conservative paintings. I think I still probably am making conservative paintings, but like, it's a sort of determination and a wanting to achieve something, and I think that I think comes through in the work. I don't know how to explain that. I don't know how to visually. There's so many different ways you could visually represent it, but I think it's pushing boundaries, whether it's your own or politically, or it's just challenging what is.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you could have any 3 artists dead or alive over for dinner, who would they be?
Oh man.
Salvador Dali.
Oh gee, no, I don't know. I don't know if I'd have him. Yeah, what a maniac.
Yeah, I know.
Couldn't even have dinner. I would take now. How do you pronounce this guy? So Andrei Tarkovsky, Russian filmmaker. Just because I'm super interested now, and I've watched one of his films, Stalker, and that's probably the most incredible film I've ever seen. Just what a trip. I would have David Hockney. I have to cite him just because what a wealth of knowledge. And can't I also just have Gerhard Richter actually?
Okay. Cool.
There's so many. I'm like
not Kanye West, huh?
No, not anymore. Now I wanted to say like, Kanye. No, I don't know why I said that. Yeah.
Have you seen those pictures of like George Bush made of himself like in the shower or something like that?
No.
There's like a whole bunch that he made of himself. Or of
George
things.
Bush made paintings of himself in
he's
the
like
shower. I
well,
know he was making paintings.
one of them's in the shower, but
Oh.
some of them are just like, other things.
Other things. He's dog. Yeah, let's go with those 3 artists for now.
Okay, cool. So are you ready for the rapid fire no think yes or no questions?
Absolutely not.
Awesome. Okay.
This means don't
You're supposed to not be ready. Okay. There'll be 1 million people on Mars before we die.
No.
Work-life balance.
Work-life balance. No.
The Earth is definitely flat.
Of course.
One day, people won't age past their prime.
Oof. No. Yes. Yes. I believe that.
People should give up shaking hands forever.
Fuck no.
Art critics are a valuable and crucial net benefit to society.
Ooh. Yes. Cover my yeah.
Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris, for hosting me.
Awesome. Cool.
Good luck with the edit.